Right. Thank you all for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome into Navigating Conflict with Style. My name is Gerri Brehm, and I'm part of the Executive Advisory. And we do these monthly free webinars to really just introduce folks to concepts, or maybe it's a refresher for you if this is something that you're familiar with. I'm going to be with you for about 30 minutes, just talking very high level and giving you some suggestions if you want to dig a little bit deeper into the topic as well. I love DISC. It is something that I was introduced to back in probably the mid 90s. I was given the assessment as part of an organization I belonged with, and it was so illuminating to understand behavioral styles and how that was influencing my choice of communication. And we talk about this a lot with any kind of psychometric, but particularly with DISC, we find that these communication style preferences tend to be the things that throughout our life, we might have been praised for those behaviors. We figured out ways to make them work for us, but we also sometimes got punished for those very same behaviors. And it was just like a light bulb went off for me when I was first introduced to it to realize everything I had counted on or believed to be a strength in myself was at times. And other times it was the very behavior that was then creating conflict with other people. So let's go ahead and jump into the session itself, which go. So we're going to talk about conflict through the lens of DISC styles. And if you're not familiar with DISC, it's one of the many psychometric assessments that are out there. You may be familiar with things like Berkman or Myers-Briggs or interaction styles, social styles. Most of them are coming from the same behind the scenes science, if you will, of what are we measuring and how do people tend to show up. Not one assessment will ever assess everything about you or give you a picture of your full self, but they can give you insights into how others might be experiencing you. And that's what I find so helpful with DISC is it doesn't lock me into any behavior, but it does say that I can make choices around the behaviors that I use and when I use them. So if you're not familiar with DISC, it is an acronym, and it is typically, there's a couple of different versions out there, but you'll tend to see it as described as dominance for the D, and influence for the I. Steadiness is typically what's used for the S style, and then C has been cautiousness, compliance, conscientiousness. So anything that sort of goes into that realm of somebody who wants to take care and do it right. So again, it's just an acronym. We can jump into any one of these squares, and we probably do multiple times a day in order to be successful. What I typically find is most people wouldn't be employed. They wouldn't be in any relationships if they didn't know how to already flex their style a little bit. But what that does take is a sense of a willingness to put energy into that flex. And when we think about conflict, there are times where we fall into these modes of, I don't have the energy to go up against you. And it feels like there's just incompatibility. It just feels like we're going to clash. I disagree with everything you do or how you do it. I am in opposition with what you say and how you say it. And I've actually started building a little bit of scar tissue around how you approach conflict. And it just feels like a complete mismatch. Ideally, that same spark, if we were going to light the match, is creating a space for open exchange of ideas or approaches. And when you have different communication styles, different ways of looking at the world or a problem, you actually can then spark innovation. You can find what's the best way to solve this, and find maybe even a unique answer that nobody had thought of before. Ideally, we're thinking about conflict that is focusing on the issue and not the person. So talking about DISC today through this lens, thinking about it for conflict, it really is, can I now take away the behaviors that have annoyed me or set me off? And that's separate from the issue at hand. And can I in any way have empathy for how this person approaches a problem? Can I at least look at it maybe even a bit more analytically of like, oh, if that's their approach, how do I leverage their approach to this problem so that I'm not in conflict with them? I'm not battling their style to get to the issue at hand. So that's the goal of all this. if people aren't familiar with DISC, and I've seen some of the folks that are registered today, so I know some of you are actually quite skilled in DISC. So I'm going to do this little refresher for folks that might not have seen it for a while or been exposed to it before. But just starting out with, when it comes to dominance, we're really looking at folks that are comfortable with being direct. They show up direct, decisive. Others might even experience them as bold and opinionated, and they love a challenge. They want to lean into what is the issue and how do we solve for that. It's like, I love a good fight kind of approach. The influence style, engaging, inclusive, also seen as outspoken by others because they love to share their thoughts. They tend to be described as charming and they love interaction. They want to get things done through people. And so they want to have those conversations. Now, you can see these two alone, there could be a lot of overlap and they might not be in conflict much, but there could be moments where the bold and opinionated person and the outspoken person could have little bump ups. And influence is going to want to save that relationship, and dominance is want to get to a result as quickly as possible. As we go around the two by two here, we've got steadiness, which tends to want to be warm and thoughtful and reserved in terms of how they show up or share their thoughts and ideas. They're going to be a bit more structured in how they want to put those thoughts together, and they want harmony. They want us all just to get along. Can we not raise our voices? Can we make sure everyone gets heard? So there's this steady approach to how do we move through things. So you can start seeing there might be a bit of a disconnect between how dominance wants to show up and how steadiness wants to show up. They're a little bit at cross purposes sometimes. And we get this last one of cautiousness or conscientiousness or compliance. They're detailed, they're analytical, they're going to be highly questioning and skeptical. They're not going to just trust it because you say to trust it. They're going to want to know what's the data and research that backs this up or supports it. And they love alone time. They would prefer if a challenge or issue rises up, let me go to my own space and let me work on this alone and come back to you with some solutions. So none of these are wrong in terms of how they approach anything, but what you can start seeing is the person who wants to be alone, that cautiousness, that C style, can then be at odds with the influence style who wants to do it with people and have a conversation about it and talk it through. As the cautiousness person is asking questions, the influence person might be like, well, don't you trust me? Why are you asking me a million questions? My gut's telling me this is the right thing to do. And by the way, that gut response is a data point. It just might not be a data point that the C style recognizes or values. So we start seeing these points of stress between the four styles. Now, when I think about it, and when I've done coaching with folks and we're using style, particularly DISC style, as maybe just a common language to help recognize things. In fact, I'm working with somebody right now, and when we started talking about a conflict they were in, I asked, well, what outcome are you looking for? And as we dug in, we realized there's different ways. And to be honest about what am I really trying to have happen here, it starts out with, well, of course, I want to solve the problem. But when you dig a little bit, sometimes it's a bit more, well, actually, I want to win. And if I have to win with them losing, I'm okay with that. You dig a little bit more, and you have some folks that say, look, I want to win-win. I think we all can find some kind of way forward together. I've worked with folks who are like, I just cannot be in this battle. I will lose. It's fine. I'm going to pick my battles. Let them take this win. I don't care. I just want to preserve the relationship or move on and stop talking about this. And so there's a little bit of acquiescence to the other person. The last one is a bit of lose-lose of I don't want to be wrong, but if I'm going to be wrong, you're going to be wrong too. Now, I've got these sort of assigned to styles. We all run through them at different times, so it's not necessarily just by style, but there are some patterns that we can see. So that D style tends to want to fight it out, which tends to be a bit more win-lose. And they're ready to go into battle. I will fight you if I believe strongly about this thing. Let's have it out. Let's get all the issues on the table. I want to know what we're fighting about even. But we have the I style, which is a bit more flight. Look, I don't want anybody to have hurt feelings, maybe even mainly myself. I don't want to be in an argument with somebody. I don't want somebody to make it personal and start calling me out for how I'm approaching things. And so I might want to avoid those conversations when I can, or let's let tempers maybe calm down a bit before we jump into what might be the issue. That S style, many times it looks like a fawning because I just want to keep the peace. So it's like, I'm just going to bow out of the argument and like, sure, 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 whatever you want. And then that C style can be a bit more, I'm going to freeze you. I'm going to ask you so many questions. I will just stop you in place and freeze the conversation and freeze you out. Become so analytical and hypercritical about what's being said that, other styles are like, whoa, did I not do my homework? I thought I'd done my homework. So each style will show up with their own, if you will, preference or at least recognizable patterns for how they've tended to deal with conflict in the past. Now you put some of these together and you can see it's a bit of a battle. That idea of, fight for what you want, but just whatever works for you. Those two things can drive each other crazy. I know for myself, I am a bit more on that steadiness factor. So I used to acquiesce to things. I just like, how do I accommodate you? I just don't want to fight. But when I was working with executives, when I was internally at a company, and they wanted to hear what my thoughts were, they wanted me to push back. They wanted me to say, hey, I think you're wrong here, and here's why. They wanted to prove that I was passionate about a decision I wanted to make. So they're frustrated by my acquiescence. They're not happy about it. And I didn't realize that. And once I saw DISC, it's like, oh, that explains it. And now I've got to find the way to flex up to sharing my thoughts in a more direct way. I've got to fight for what I want, not fight them, but fight for what I want. And the D styles were learning that, oh, I need to leave space for them. And maybe I manage my volume a bit so they feel like it's safe to actually push back on me. We've got those I styles that might just like, ooh, can we talk about this later when people have calmed down or when I've got, my head together. And then you've got the, C that just wants to dive into the detail. But my data says, I can prove that you're wrong. Look at all the ways you're wrong. Well, nobody wants to be proved wrong and they don't want to be in a contentious conversation. So the sense of, as I said before, sometimes that I just goes to what my gut says or what I'm feeling is, and a C might go into analytics, but the data doesn't support that. So finding that way to, on both sides, I come to the table ready to say, look, here's what the data says. And the C recognizing that feelings are a version of data because sometimes what that I is picking up is the intangible, the thing that can't be measured. And it's still worth noting. That I might have a better sense of what's going on in the organization because they've talked to so many people. They have anecdotal evidence that still can back up their statement. So it's really having a bit more respect for the things that aren't necessarily math, right? It's that sense of, oh, they've got a take on this, and that take can help influence how we then use the data that is quantifiable. So with this, we're really thinking about in these conversations, we sometimes have all these strengths, and it's those strengths overplayed in the midst of conflict. And the conflict is sometimes coming because we've got so much on our plate and we're being asked to solve problems quickly, or it's a changing environment. We're being asked to solve a problem that didn't exist 20 minutes ago, but they want that solution in 5. So this sense of my strengths now become my Achilles heel. So if I'm a dominant style, all that bold decisiveness looks like somebody is just ranting and coming in demanding and aggressive, maybe sounding tactless, maybe controlling it. Like the fastest way to get to a solution is you do it my way. So others are experiencing them a bit more egotistical or impatient. They're not going to look like a great listener. And because they're happy with the argument and the challenge, they're going to look and sound more argumentative than the other styles. That influencing style might be so focused on, I don't want anybody to have hurt feelings. And, yes, let's all get along. Let's all find our way together. They might look illogical or even glib in how they're talking about the problem. It's no big deal. It's going to be fine. They might look gullible because they got swayed by somebody who was maybe magnetic to them. Long-winded. So there's a lot of talking from this style sometimes. And I will say to others, they can sometimes look self-promoting. Every once in a while, because they want to sway people, it might be, hey, here's what I think, and here's what I experienced, and here's what I heard. And so it looks like it's just about them as opposed to the issue in front of on the table. They also can look like a situational listener. So they might be more easily distracted than another style. They don't want to have the uncomfortable conversations. So they might be shifting out of discomfort quite quickly. It doesn't look like you feel fully heard in those situations. So every once in a while, they're pie in the sky, anything's possible. Positivity and optimism can look unrealistic and maybe even a little impulsive to the other styles. If you see my little friend there in green at the bottom of the screen, well, everybody's got their thumbs up. They've got a thumbs up, but their little fingers are crossed behind their back because this is the biggest challenge for steadiness. To keep the peace, they are sometimes coming across as unconcerned or unreadable. They don't want to they will hold a grudge because they don't want to actually call out what's not working for them. They look hesitating, so it looked like they agreed with a thumbs up, but they're not taking any action. They look passive aggressive because they look like they're nodding and smiling in the meeting, but they're actually just wanting to let you know, I'm listening. I disagree, but I'm listening. And so then they're stubborn and they don't move forward. So there's this sense from other styles of, I thought we were all in agreement. And if you did in agreement, why wouldn't you have said something in the room? It feels like a waste of time that you're now dragging your feet. They tend to resist change. They look like somebody who is inflexible with whatever what might be new coming down the path. So this style is challenging because it's hard to get a read on them. You don't know that they're disagreeing, and you don't even know sometimes you're in conflict with them. But they will hold on to that conflict for weeks or months or years if they felt pushed into a corner to do something. And yet part of that was they never spoke up to say they disagreed. That cautiousness style we've already talked about, they don't want to have a mistake. So all of that great skill of making sure it's analytical and they've asked all the right questions and they've avoided any traps or obstacles that might be coming, they're now coming across as hyper rational and extra picky, condescending in terms of, well, that's not how I interpreted the data. Maybe even hypercritical that somebody else made a mistake. Typically, that hypercritical is because they're hypercritical on themselves as well. They don't want to make a mistake, so they call out anything that might look like an error. They might come across as aloof and a bit more defensive to other styles because they're keeping that distance. They tend to be quite risk adverse, which is why they're asking all these questions and why they're double checking or triple checking, why there might be analysis paralysis of getting something moved forward. And they will sound quite pessimistic. So again, we've got these opposites of cautiousness and influence. That influence style is thinking, here's all the possibilities. Let's blue sky this to solve this problem. And cautiousness, that C style might be, whoa, let's just ground ourselves now and stop thinking about these ridiculous, unrealistic options. This is never going to work. I can see all the things that are going to go wrong. And so they're thinking about the 16 things that could go wrong before they ever even get to a potential solution. So you get these situations in rooms where people are so frustrated and tired of constantly interacting with somebody who looks passive aggressive, looks like they're overbearing, somebody who looks like they're not grounded in reality, to somebody who looks like they are just looking to find all the errors. So you get tired and you stop putting any energy into flexing. And so the conflict continues. And then the conflict starts moving into, I'm now in conflict with you. I'm not in conflict. I'm not trying to solve the conflict at play. I'm not trying to solve the issue that's at hand. I'm making you the problem. And that we can't find a solution because you're not playing along the way I would want you to play along. So we're going to talk about some of those. What are we looking for? Results versus relationships? Or can we find a way to have results and relationships? This is where flexing comes in. And it's not a huge change in who you are. It's one small flex realizing I'm not getting what I need from my approach so far. So what can I try differently? As a D, if any of those traits felt familiar for you in terms of decisiveness and directness and that dominant style, share the goal and outcome you want to achieve. Just make sure everybody even understands what you're trying to accomplish here, because you might be making assumptions everyone's on the same page. Whenever possible, be curious and ask those open-ended questions. And when somebody is talking, really sit on your impulse to debate, but listen to understand. What are they saying? How are they seeing this? What perspective are they adding to this that I haven't paid attention to? And avoid interrupting. whether that's sit on your hands or bite your tongue, just give them that space to talk. Another style that needs to give space for talking is flexing as an I. So because it's relationship based, remember that productive conflict actually strengthens relationships. It's a way to build trust to have productive conflict. When possible, bring facts to the conversation because it's going to help some of the other styles anchor onto something and not just feel like this is pie in the sky thinking. Manage volume, manage your gestures or optimism, particularly if you're working with somebody who's a bit more reserved. This can be overwhelming. High volume can be overwhelming. Talking fast can be overwhelming. So just flexing to the pace or speed of the other person so they feel that they like meets like in that moment. And again, avoid interrupting because you've got a lot to say. And sometimes the passion of sharing thoughts and ideas and adding on looks like interruption as opposed to building conversation. For that S style, speaking up. People don't know there's an issue if you don't share there's an issue. People don't know you've got a disagreement if you don't share there's a disagreement. Also shift the language choice from I think, it might be, it could be, it's possibly to more definitive language. It is. I will. What we have done. And again, remember that productive conflict is serving that larger goal. That sometimes that discomfort is helping us get to where we need to be. I'm also going to highly recommend if you recognize that S style in yourself, check yourself for head nodding in meetings, particularly when you disagree with the content. S's tend to nod their head to show I'm listening, and other styles are reading that as agreement and that you are on board and have no issues. If you are a head nodder, you might need to verbalize, okay, I've heard you. Here's some things I'm actually concerned about, or here's some things I'm thinking about. So come to the table prepared, if you will, to speak up about what those concerns might be. And the last one, our C style. Need to remember that sometimes there are two right answers, and sometimes the answer has to be found between people. It's not an obvious yes or no binary result. Be open to hearing someone talk about their gut feelings. And I'm going to stress again, gut feelings are a version of data. Those I's and S's sometimes are taking in information in a different way. And it's still information. They're still getting a temperature check of organization or of a team. And that's valuable information to help make the work, the quantitative work, come alive. Listen to understand and not correct them. Or I will say that there are sometimes for C style, as other styles are sharing a big picture perspective, they'll pick one thing and nitpick on that one thing. And everyone's like, but that wasn't the whole concept I was trying to share. Or they share a deck or they share a report and there's one typo or there's one font change and the C focuses in on that mistake as opposed to what were the broad brush strokes? What's really working here? Yes, I'll tell somebody, hey, by the way, before we send this forward, we want to probably catch the spelling error, or can we dig into these details a little bit more? Can we make sure all the fonts are aligned? We can have that conversation, but we start with what's working before moving into what's not working. So every style has its own way to flex and adjust. And I will tell you that since the mid 90s, as I've been doing this, I've seen huge adjustments in people and people who thought this relationship is dead and gone. I don't have the energy to even try to solve for this, but realizing there were small flexes that they could do shifted everything. And it's everything from team members feeling like, oh my gosh, my boss finally values what I bring to the table. I feel like they're finally listening to me. It is people saying, oh, I was so focused on telling people what was going to go wrong, I never bothered to tell them why I was even bothering to give them that feedback because I think it's a great idea. I'm just wired to tell them all the mistakes so that we fix those mistakes before it goes forward. But their team members saw that only as jumping in and pulling wings off butterflies. I would say for the I's and the S's, they can sometimes be so focused on relationship, others aren't seeing them move the ball forward. They're not seeing them push things through to completion. So being a bit more direct and a bit more results oriented in how they talk about what they're doing can ease the stress and the pressure on the other styles. And these, in many cases, it feels like they're doing a ton of flexing. I found them finally easier to work with because they were so They didn't hold grudges. I did, but they didn't. They were clear about here's what I want. What I needed more clarity was a bit more context. And so being able to ask for that context in a way that they realized was helping them get the result they wanted was the beginning of them flexing. As a coach, getting D's to realize they need to maybe speak last in the room. They maybe need to set the stage and encourage people to speak up and then recognize and acknowledge those moments where somebody might be stepping into discomfort to talk through a difficult issue and the thanking them for making that happen, making that come to the surface. So every style has something they can do to help ease how they are interacting with others. If you are walking into any space and you're like looking, they're the problem, there's a problem between the two of you. Yes, there are times where somebody is, maybe they need help. Maybe they have other issues that can't be resolved through DISC, obviously, but we are showing up in some way that is triggering something from them. And most of the time, if I do one small flex, I actually start getting a flex from the other person. And it gets us closer to that resolving relationship while getting results. If this was in any way helpful or you think that it's something that you'd like to have more information on, I will just go ahead and do my own little mini push here. I did write a book about a year ago. It's called Communicating with Style. It's a handbook for discovering yourself and others. Conflict is one of the chapters in the book. I wrote it because it's something that I've used with my family for the last 30 years. And so we thought, maybe writing a book about how DISC shows up throughout our lives. So that's a QR code to get that book. You don't have to. I will also say that you can reach out, and here's a QR code. It goes to our executive advisory email. If you've got an individual question or something you want to dig in on a little bit, I'm happy to take time to meet with you. We can just set up a consultation conversation and just answer any questions you might have or dig into it a little bit. I also want to let you know that we have a whole suite of programs. We can do a deep dive with DISC in your organization. This might be something that you'd see of value. DISC and thinking about change can be quite helpful because each style responds to change in a very specific way. And so as leaders or managers, or if you're on the infrastructure part of the company, like human resources or learning and development, helping folks really understand their approach to change. The world is constantly shifting. How do we help people do that more effectively? Getting feedback. So as we hit those different marks in the year where people need to sit down and have those performance conversations, we can do feedback conversations and think about, well, who am I actually going to be having that conversation with? Navigating conflict with DISC is taking this concept and really digging into it, going and having practical application with the group as they think about style and conflict in their own situations. And then ultimately, we've got a workshop that is for if I'm managing people. This is quite helpful if you're new to managing, or if you've got a population that is a new manager, because it gives them that shortcut of here's how I can, reach that employee a little bit faster, be a little bit more effective in how I ask for things, set goals, set expectations, give feedback, and follow up and make sure that they're feeling heard and respected. So that's our webinar next month. We've got Heather MacArthur. She's going to be on Monday, August 24th. I think it's 12 p.m. She's going to have a free webinar on building teams to weather the storm. So I'm going to encourage you can sign up for that. There's the QR code. And again, these are free. If you sign up, even if you're unable to attend, you will get a link to the video version of the session. And so it's something that you can share on, or you can watch if you were unable to attend. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.